Have you ever noticed what happens when you stop reaching out? When you stop explaining, stop chasing, and instead choose silence. At first it feels strange, like there's a void, a sudden emptiness where words and effort used to be. But here's what's powerful about that silence. It doesn't stay quiet for long. Over time it begins to echo. And for someone who's always been on the receiving end of your attention, that echo can be deafening. Because here's the truth most people don't talk about, especially in relationships. We're often conditioned to believe that effort is what keeps us connected. That if we just try harder, explain better, or give more, everything will work out. But sometimes the most powerful move is to step back. Not out of spite, not to manipulate, but to reclaim your peace. And when you do that, when you choose stillness over pursuit, something shifts. For the woman who's used to your presence, your validation, your emotional energy, your absence doesn't just go unnoticed. It becomes unsettling. She may not understand it at first. She may even brush it off. But deep down, the silence starts to ask questions she wasn't prepared to answer. Why did he stop reaching out? Why doesn't he react anymore? Did something change? You see, silence doesn't just remove noise, it creates space. And that space reveals the emotional truth of the relationship. It forces reflection. It shifts power. And suddenly, the one who always felt in control is left wondering. So if you've ever questioned whether stepping back is weakness, remember this. Silence isn't retreat. It's strength in stillness. It's the beginning of clarity, and sometimes it speaks louder than anything you could ever say. So what really happens when a man stops engaging emotionally? When he pulls back, not with anger, not with drama, but with quiet clarity? For a woman who's used to being pursued, who's accustomed to his consistent attention, this shift feels like a ripple in her world. It interrupts the emotional rhythm she's come to expect. The script she thought she was directing suddenly falls apart. At first, it's just confusion. Why isn't he reacting? Why didn't he respond the way I thought he would? The questions start small, but they don't stay that way for long. Curiosity sets in. And then it deepens. It transforms into something more consuming, obsession. Not obsession in a dramatic movie scene kind of way, but in the quiet moments when she's scrolling through old messages, wondering about his silence, replaying conversations in her mind, trying to pinpoint when the shift began. Because here's the thing, emotional detachment isn't loud. It doesn't yell or slam doors, but it does break patterns. And when patterns break, people notice, especially those who once felt in control, and that's the core of it, control. When a man disengages, he takes back emotional control, not just from the relationship, but from within himself. And when she no longer has access to his reactions, his attention, his energy, what's left is a vacuum. And the human mind? It hates a vacuum. She'll start trying to fill that space with meaning, with guesses, with stories. And ironically, the very silence that once felt like a withdrawal now becomes a source of power, because a man who no longer responds on cue becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability breeds desire. Not by force, but by nature. So if you've ever stepped back, not to punish, but to protect your peace, understand this. It doesn't go unnoticed. In fact, it may just be the moment everything begins to shift. Let's be clear, silence isn't always a weapon. When used with intention, silence becomes something far more powerful. Strength. It's not about punishing anyone, it's about pulling back with dignity. When a man chooses silence, not to manipulate, not to provoke, but simply to protect his peace, it doesn't go unnoticed. Especially by a woman who is used to emotional access. She might not say it out loud, but the shift shakes her. Why? Because for the first time, she's no longer the one in control of the emotional rhythm. And what's left in the absence of noise? A mirror. Suddenly, she's replaying old conversations. Not yours, hers. She's wondering, was I too cold, too distant? Did I miss something? She's scrolling back through messages, overanalyzing your responses, your timing, even your silence. And that silence, it grows louder in her mind than any words ever could. You see, when you stop showing up emotionally, not out of anger but out of self-respect, it causes a psychological shift. She no longer feels secure in the dynamic. The woman who once measured your value now starts questioning her own. But here's what matters most. This kind of silence only works when it's rooted in inner peace, not in spite. If you disappear to hurt her, she'll feel bitterness, not strength. But if you walk away because your time, your energy, your worth deserve more, she'll feel that too, deeply. And what used to be seen as ignoring now feels like mystery. What once looked like absence becomes presence, stronger, more unshakable, and far more powerful than words. This is the moment when she stops trying to figure out you and starts being confronted by herself, because real silence doesn't punish. It reflects, and sometimes the scariest thing for someone used to control is the quiet truth staring back at them. Have you ever noticed how silence, when it's real, calm, and intentional, can be louder than any words? That's because, as humans, we're wired to notice what's missing more than what's in front of us. We take presence for granted, but absence makes us feel. When a man chooses to walk away, not with bitterness, not with a dramatic exit, but with quiet certainty, he creates a kind of emotional vacuum. And that vacuum gets attention, not because he yelled, not because he begged, but because he simply stopped showing up. You see, it's not about disappearing to get a reaction. That's rooted in insecurity. It's about knowing your value so deeply that you no longer need to convince someone to see it. That kind of absence isn't cold, it's powerful. And here's the thing, people can feel the difference. If you pull back just to punish, she'll sense the resentment. But if you step away because your peace is worth protecting, your silence carries weight. It speaks with clarity. Imagine this, 2 people in a room. One keeps talking, filling the space with noise. The other is just still, calm, composed. Who do you notice more? It's not the one shouting. It's the one you can't read. When you're absent with purpose, when you stop chasing, stop explaining, stop trying to be enough, you become a mirror. Not for her, but for yourself. And that's when you rise. Because at the end of the day, your absence isn't just silence. It's a declaration. A quiet, steady reminder that your energy is not something to be wasted. It's something to be earned. There's a quiet kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. But when it shows up, it's unforgettable. That's what happens when a man chooses silence not out of anger, not to manipulate, but out of clarity and peace. It's not a retreat, it's a revelation. When you detach from someone emotionally, especially someone who's used to having your attention, your energy, your constant presence, it disrupts the entire dynamic. You're no longer responding on cue. You're no longer feeding her need for validation. And suddenly the silence becomes louder than any words you ever spoke. A woman who once had emotional access to you, who could reach out and always expect a reply, now finds herself shut out of a space she once felt entitled to. And that shift shakes her. Not because you hurt her, but because she doesn't understand it. You've stepped off the stage she thought she was directing. So what does she do? She reaches out. Not always with love. Sometimes it's curiosity. Sometimes it's ego. Most often it's the need to regain a sense of control. She's not texting to reconnect. She's texting to test. Are you still emotionally available to me? Can I still stir you? But here's the key. If your silence is rooted in confidence, not in bitterness, not in sulking, it sends a very different message. One that says, I don't need your approval to know who I am. And that message hits differently. It's unsettling, because it's no longer about her. It's about you reclaiming your power, your center. And when you stay grounded in that silence, you become more than just the man who walked away. You become the man she can no longer predict and can no longer control. That's when she realizes the story has changed, and for the first time, she's not the one holding the pen. Have you ever noticed how the more predictable something is, the less we chase it? Certainty brings safety, but it rarely sparks desire. On the other hand, uncertainty, mystery, the unknown, that's what keeps people awake at night. That's what lingers in the mind long after the conversation ends. When a man reacts with anger, it gives closure. The other person can say, he's upset. He still cares. I still matter. But when that same man responds with calm, with poise, with true emotional detachment, it disrupts everything. It removes the expected emotional script. It creates a silence that doesn't scream but echoes. And that echo? That's what makes him unforgettable. You see, emotional stillness is powerful. Because it forces the other person to sit with themselves, not with your reactions. When you're not offering a response, they're left to wrestle with their own questions, their own insecurities, their own narratives. Is he thinking about me? Has he moved on? Did I lose him for real this time? And that space, that uncertainty, builds tension. Not the destructive kind, but the kind that breeds curiosity, fascination, even longing. Suddenly, you're not just a man who's pulled away. You become a mystery, a presence that can't be decoded, predicted, or controlled. This is the paradox of emotional detachment. The less you try to prove your worth, the more powerful your presence becomes. When you stop chasing, stop explaining, stop reacting, you force others to feel your absence. And in that absence, they begin to see your value in a way they never could when you were always available. So if you've ever been told that staying silent or calm makes you cold, think again. Sometimes your calmness isn't indifference, it's strength. And in a world addicted to drama, a man who stays grounded becomes the rarest type of man there is, the one who's truly unforgettable. Let's clear something up. True emotional detachment isn't coldness. It's not bitterness, and it's definitely not about punishing someone. It's peace, inner peace. When a man reaches a place where he no longer reacts, no longer explains, and no longer allows his emotional center to be shaken by someone else's chaos, that's not weakness. That's maturity. That's power. And here's what most people never talk about. When a woman is used to holding emotional influence over a man, and suddenly that influence is gone, it doesn't just confuse her, it rattles her. It forces a shift in the dynamic. It breaks the pattern. Suddenly, the emotional cues she once relied on, his frustration, his need to clarify, his constant reassurance, they're gone. And that silence becomes louder than any argument ever could. That's the power of true detachment. It doesn't come from ego. It doesn't come from playing games. It comes from growth. From the deep, quiet realization that peace is worth more than being understood, and that you don't have to prove your worth to anyone who doesn't already see it. Think about it. Emotional detachment is not about shutting down. It's about showing up differently. It's choosing not to be controlled by someone else's highs and lows. It's choosing to respond instead of react, to observe instead of absorb. And here's the unexpected twist. When a man becomes emotionally unavailable in a grounded, centered way, it doesn't make him invisible. It makes him magnetic, because in a world of noise, drama, and overreaction, calmness stands out. Self-possession becomes irresistible. So if you've ever been called distant for choosing your peace, remember this. Detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about yourself not to lose who you are in someone else's storm. Real detachment isn't about shutting people out. It's about not letting them in where they no longer belong. There's a moment in every man's journey when he stops trying to explain himself. He stops chasing approval, stops reacting to every slight, every passive-aggressive remark, every emotional tug-of-war. Not because he's angry, but because he's done. That's what true detachment looks like. Not coldness, not resentment, just stillness. It's the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove anything anymore. It doesn't seek to be understood. It doesn't plead to be seen. It simply is. And for the woman who's used to holding emotional power over him, who's relied on his reactions, his explanations, his desire to fix things, this shift is jarring. Suddenly, the emotional loop is broken. The game no longer works. The pattern dissolves. She begins to realize something powerful. This man no longer defines his worth by how she responds to him. Her silence doesn't wound him. Her approval doesn't validate him. He has reclaimed his sense of self, and it shows. You see, redefining self-worth isn't about becoming indifferent. It's about becoming centered. It's choosing not to let someone else's behavior dictate your peace. It's knowing that you can care without compromising yourself, and love without losing your identity. When a man no longer needs to be right, or to be chosen, or even to be liked, that's when he becomes truly powerful. He walks away not out of spite, but because he respects himself too much to stay where he isn't honored. And in that moment, something shifts, not just in him, but in the entire dynamic. Because when you stop reacting, you start reflecting. When you stop begging, you start building. And when you stop needing, you start attracting everything that matches your peace. So ask yourself this. Are you still chasing validation from someone who's already shown you they don't see your value? Or are you finally ready to rewrite the script and remember who you were before you forgot your worth? Because true self-worth doesn't need applause. It just needs awareness. There's a unique kind of power that doesn't shout, doesn't chase, and doesn't demand attention. It simply exists. And when a man embodies that kind of calm presence, rooted in true emotional detachment, it shakes the room in silence because most people are used to emotional noise. Arguments, justifications, apologies, energy. That keeps the emotional cycle spinning. But when you pull back, not with anger, but with peace, it leaves a different kind of impact. One that's deeply felt, yet difficult to explain. You stop feeding the emotional loop. You're no longer reactive. You don't rise to bait. You're not trying to fix or explain or prove. You're just there, solid, grounded, unbothered. And that kind of energy is disorienting, especially for someone who once thrived on emotional control. Here's the thing. When you reclaim your emotional center, people notice, even if they don't say it. Your calm becomes a mirror. It forces them to sit with their own noise, their own restlessness. And in that contrast, they begin to realize something has shifted. You've become gravity. You're no longer chasing, you're attracting, you're no longer explaining, you're embodying. Your presence alone speaks louder than any argument ever could, and this isn't about manipulating anyone. It's about liberation. It's about choosing peace over performance. It's about realizing that your value isn't tied to how loud you speak, how hard you try, or how much you sacrifice to be seen. Real power is stillness. It's restraint. It's knowing who you are and refusing to be shaken by someone else's storm. So ask yourself, are you living in constant emotional reaction, or are you standing in your calm power? Because once you stop seeking to be understood, you become unforgettable. And in a world full of noise, your peace becomes the most compelling presence in the room. Letting go isn't always about pain. Sometimes it's about power. You reach a point in your emotional journey where you're no longer driven by anger, confusion, or the need to prove your worth. Instead, you move on, not out of bitterness, but from a place of profound clarity. You see things as they are, not as you hoped they would be. And in that clarity, you reclaim something most people never find: peace. When a woman's behavior becomes inconsistent, hot and cold, present then distant, it used to shake you. It used to send you into spirals of questioning, overthinking, reacting, but not anymore. Now her inconsistency doesn't stir your energy. It reveals your growth, because self-mastery isn't about controlling someone else. It's about mastering your own emotional response. It's about no longer handing over your peace to someone who hasn't earned your presence. There's a quiet power in being unmoved. Not cold, not numb, but centered. You're not chasing. You're not waiting for her to figure it out. You're no longer clinging to crumbs of attention or hoping for closure. Why? Because your peace is no longer negotiable. And here's the twist. That level of calm, that detachment rooted in self-respect, it's magnetic. Far more magnetic than desperation ever was. You become the mystery, the one who didn't fight, didn't beg, didn't collapse. The one who simply walked away, whole. That's the power of emotional self-mastery. When you stop trying to win someone back, you win yourself. So ask yourself, what are you still fighting for that's costing you your peace? What are you holding on to that keeps you from your calm? Let go, not with resentment, but with wisdom. Because the man who walks away with clarity is the one who walks away free. There's a powerful shift that happens when a man stops chasing and starts choosing himself. At first, your silence may seem like distance, but over time it becomes something more, a mirror, a vacuum. And in that space, something fascinating begins to unfold. She starts chasing. Not out of love, but out of the deep discomfort of losing control. You see, when a woman is used to holding emotional power, your detachment becomes disorienting. She can no longer predict your reactions. She can't read your mood. And that uncertainty drives a need to restore balance, to pull you back into the dynamic she once controlled. So she pokes. She tests. She says things designed to trigger a response. not always with malice, but with a subconscious need to feel reassured that she still matters. But here's where everything changes. You don't flinch. You don't react. Not out of spite, but because you've done the work. You've chosen peace over performance, clarity over chaos. And that makes all the difference, because emotional maturity doesn't play tug of war. It observes. It holds space. It lets others reveal themselves while remaining rooted in self-respect. This is the moment when the narrative shifts from "please choose me" to "I choose myself." That's not ego. That's evolution, and the impact is undeniable. When you stop performing for approval, you stop giving away your power. You become grounded, clear, untouchable, not because you're hiding, but because you've returned to your center. So there's something powerful about absence, not the kind that disappears in bitterness, but the kind that leaves behind meaning when you walk away, not with anger, not with spite, but with peace. You leave behind more than silence. You leave a mirror, a space where someone is finally forced to see what they chose not to see before. At first, they may think nothing has changed, that your presence was optional, that your kindness, your support, your consistency could be replaced or ignored. But time has a way of sharpening clarity, and the longer the echo of your absence lingers, the louder it becomes. You see, most people don't hear silence right away. But over time, they begin to feel the weight of what's missing, not because you vanished, but because you mattered. Your emotional presence, once taken for granted, now echoes through their empty conversations, their unmet needs, their quiet regrets. That's the difference between walking away to punish and walking away to heal. One is about ego. The other is about self-worth. You gave something real. And when it wasn't seen, you didn't yell, you didn't beg, you didn't perform, you stepped back. And that space you created? It wasn't cold. It wasn't void. It was meaningful. It gave her the chance to reflect, to feel, and maybe to understand what she had before it was gone. The echo of your absence is not about being missed. It's about being recognized. Finally. And here's the truth. When you detach from someone with clarity and not chaos, your silence becomes a lesson. A gentle, undeniable reminder that not everyone is replaceable. So if you've ever wondered whether stepping back matters, remember this. The right kind of absence doesn't create emptiness. It creates awareness. And sometimes that awareness arrives too late for them, but just in time for you. Let's talk about a moment many men don't see coming, when she tries to provoke you. Not out of hate, but out of curiosity, out of confusion, out of a deep unspoken question. Are you really done? You see, when you've withdrawn emotionally, when your silence isn't cold but calm, something powerful happens. You no longer react to the noise, the games, or the old patterns. And that silence? It becomes a boundary. But here's the test. When she realizes she no longer controls your attention, she might try to get it back. In the only way she knows how. Through drama, through subtle digs, through emotional provocation. She might say something that used to light a fire in you. She may push a button she knows well. And why? Not because she hates you, but because your emotional distance is unsettling. It's foreign. It forces her to ask herself, who is this version of him? In that moment, your true emotional strength is revealed, not in how loud you respond, but in how calm you remain. You don't need to prove your peace. You don't need to argue your evolution. You simply hold your center, because real detachment isn't about punishing her. It's about protecting you. Your silence is not a sword. It's a shield, a quiet reminder that you've grown past needing chaos to feel connection. And if you're ever tempted to break that silence just to defend your pride, pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, am I reacting from fear or standing in my power? Because the greatest test of emotional mastery isn't found in confrontation. It's found in restraint, in choosing dignity over drama. And trust me, when you pass that test, something shifts. Not just in how she sees you, but in how you see yourself. There's a moment, maybe you've felt it, where someone tries to pull you into chaos. A passive-aggressive comment, a subtle jab, a familiar emotional game designed to trigger a reaction. But you don't take the bait, you pause, and stay quiet, not because you're weak, not because you don't care, but because you've grown. Emotional composure is not about silence for silence's sake. It's about standing tall within yourself, knowing who you are, what you deserve, and refusing to let anyone drag you back into the emotional trenches you've already climbed out of. When you don't react, it doesn't mean you're numb, it means you're disciplined. It means you've chosen peace over provocation. It means her attempt to rattle you no longer finds a home inside of you, and that unnerves people more than anything, because they expect the old version of you, the one who would argue, defend, plead, or chase. But now, you meet their chaos with calm. You don't match their energy. You protect yours. It's not indifference. It's self-respect. Real power isn't about raising your voice. It's about knowing when not to speak. It's about choosing stillness in the face of noise. And it's in that stillness where true confidence lives. Think about it. The strongest buildings don't sway in the wind. They hold their frame. You are that frame, unshaken, grounded, whole. So the next time someone tries to bait you, asks for a reaction they don't deserve, remember this: silence doesn't make you invisible. It makes you undeniable. You are not avoiding the battle. You've simply outgrown the need to fight, and in that maturity lies the kind of strength that can't be manipulated. Here's something we rarely talk about: how the things we once took for granted suddenly become the most powerful when they're gone. She used to know every move you'd make, every reaction, every word. Your presence was constant, predictable, even comforting. But over time, that familiarity became overlooked. Not out of malice, but out of habit. And then you shifted. You stopped over-explaining. You stopped showing up out of obligation. You pulled back, not with bitterness, but with clarity, and that changed everything. Suddenly, your absence spoke louder than your presence ever did. Now the air feels different when you walk into a room. Your silence holds weight. Your calm makes people wonder. And she starts to ask questions, not out loud, but deep within herself. Where did he go? Who is he becoming? The man who once chased no longer runs. The man who used to be available at every call is now focused, still, and unshaken. And that mystery, it's magnetic, because we're drawn not to what's familiar, but to what we can't fully grasp. When you stop being the man she could predict, you become the man she can't ignore. You're not being distant. You're reclaiming your space. You're no longer playing a role in her script. You've written your own, and that is what truly captivates. Remember this: a man's silence, when rooted in self-awareness, becomes a mirror others can't look away from. You become more than a presence, you become a question. And questions stir curiosity. Curiosity breeds reflection. And reflection leads to change. You didn't disappear. You simply stopped performing. And in that mystery, you became unforgettable. Let's get something straight. When you pull back, it's not about playing games. It's not silence used as a weapon. It's not manipulation. It's evolution. You're not walking away to punish. You're walking towards something deeper. Your purpose, your alignment, your peace. There's something incredibly powerful about a man who knows where he's going, who no longer craves validation or gets shaken by temporary storms. He's not moved by noise, not led by emotion. He's grounded in direction, and that energy, that silent focus, it speaks volumes. Because here's the truth: women, and people in general, are naturally drawn to those who stand in purpose. Not in need, not in clinginess, but in clarity. You don't have to convince anyone of your worth. You don't have to over-explain, over-prove, or over-perform. When you're living from a place of purpose, you radiate something rare. You create gravity. It's the man who stays in his lane, who doesn't chase but builds, who doesn't beg but creates, that leaves the deepest impression. And ironically, when you let go of trying to be wanted, that's when you become the most magnetic. Think about it. When was the last time you felt most powerful? It wasn't when you were chasing approval. It was when you were deeply focused on becoming the man you were meant to be. Restraint isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. When to act and when to simply walk away.
When to love fully and when to let go gracefully. You evolve not to escape, but to rise. Stay in your frame.
Stay on your path. Let your growth be the answer. Because when you're aligned with purpose, you stop reacting and start leading. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when everything changes. You didn't announce it. You didn't post about it. You didn't even try to prove anything, but she feels it. It's the moment your energy shifts. When your peace becomes stronger than your need to explain, when your detachment isn't cold, it's calm and strangely unshakable. You're no longer reacting, no longer seeking, and that silence, that inner stillness, it starts echoing louder than any argument ever could. At first, she might pretend not to notice. She'll brush it off, act like nothing's changed. But deep down, she knows. She used to know exactly how to provoke you, how to make you chase, how to pull your strings when she felt uncertain. But now you're no longer holding those old emotional threads. You've dropped the script. And in doing so, you've reclaimed your power. You've become the man she doesn't know how to influence anymore. And that unsettles her. Not because you've become distant or cruel, but because you've become grounded, purposeful, and truly self-contained. Here's the truth. Real growth doesn't need a spotlight. It radiates from within. You don't need to shout your transformation. It's in your posture, your pace, your presence. She can feel it, even if she never admits it. And this subtle shift, it's not about her, it's about you. About choosing peace over chaos, direction over distraction, self-respect over emotional dependency. You didn't grow to get her back. You grew because you were meant to. And now, your silence says what words never could. I've changed, not to get your attention, but because I finally saw my worth. And that shift is unforgettable. Here's where most men stumble, right at the edge of their growth. You've done the work. You've pulled back, healed, reclaimed your peace. But then the temptation whispers, what if I reach out? Just to see how she responds. It sounds innocent. Just a message. A like on her post. A subtle nudge to test the waters. But what you're really testing is your own evolution. And that's where the trap lies. Because if you need her reaction to validate your change, then it wasn't real change. It was a performance. And that's not who you're becoming. Growth doesn't need a witness. Transformation isn't measured by someone else's applause. You didn't choose peace to manipulate her. You didn't let go just to grab attention. You did it because you finally realized your worth isn't up for negotiation. And if you return to the same old dynamic just to feel seen, you'll lose the very strength you worked so hard to build. She might respond. She might not. But that's no longer the point. The real question is, why are you tempted to go back? Are you chasing closure, control? Or are you afraid of fully stepping into your new self? Because here's the truth. The journey of healing isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it looks like silence, like not texting, like choosing stillness over noise. And that is where real power lives. You stay the course not because you're playing hard to get, but because you're finally hard to break. Your peace, your progress, your sense of direction, they're not tools to win someone back. They're the foundation of who you are now. So resist the urge to re-engage for validation. You're not doing this for her. You're doing it for you, and that is the most powerful choice of all. She might never say it out loud. She might never admit she's been watching, quietly, silently from a distance. But you'll feel it, a random like on an old post. A vague comment that doesn't quite say what it means. Maybe even a question slipped into a message that has nothing to do with the real conversation. These are the soft echoes of her noticing. But here's the powerful truth. By the time she starts sending these signals, you won't need them anymore. Because you've already built something stronger than attention. You've built peace, self-respect, a foundation that doesn't tremble just because someone finally looked back. You see, when you were chasing, approval felt like oxygen. Her validation gave your actions meaning. But now you breathe on your own. And in that quiet transformation, you become magnetic. Not because you're trying to be, but because you're no longer trying at all. She may notice your growth, your distance, your calm energy, and feel drawn in. That's human nature. We often don't realize the weight of someone's presence until we feel their absence. But you're no longer playing a role in her story. You're writing your own. You're no longer waiting for someone to choose you, because you've already chosen yourself. What's meant for you doesn't require convincing, chasing, or begging. It aligns naturally, effortlessly, without force. And if she circles back, it's not a sign for you to go backward. It's simply confirmation that your energy has shifted so powerfully, it speaks without saying a word. So take that message, not as an invitation, but as evidence. Evidence that when you reclaim your worth, the world begins to notice, even if it can't always say so. And that's the kind of power that needs no explanation. There comes a moment, quiet but powerful, when you stop explaining, stop chasing, and most importantly, stop shrinking, not out of bitterness. Not to make a point, but because you've finally remembered who you are. That's the moment of emotional self-reclamation. You walked away, not because you didn't care, but because you cared enough about yourself to stop trying to prove your worth. You stopped negotiating with someone who only saw pieces of you when you were offering the whole. You didn't storm out. You didn't slam the door. You simply chose dignity over desperation. And in that silence, oh, that silence says everything. It doesn't scream for attention. It whispers truth, because silence isn't the absence of feeling. It's the presence of clarity. And when she sits with that silence, she doesn't hear hatred or revenge. She hears the echo of your peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you've stopped performing, stopped explaining, stopped trying to earn what should have been seen all along. This isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about realizing you no longer need someone else to validate your value. You live your worth now, in your posture, in your calm, in your refusal to re-enter emotional chaos just to be seen. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to convince, they finally start to see. But by then it's no longer about being seen. It's about staying free. Because when you reclaim your emotional self, you don't just walk away from them. You walk back to yourself, and that, my friend, is where real power begins. If this resonates with you, know this. Your silence doesn't make you invisible. It makes you unforgettable.